The first thing I noticed wasn't the way my brother Evan was holding my pregnant wife's hand. It wasn't even the way Rachel was laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear while I stood in the doorway of the hospital room, still wearing my paramedic uniform after a 16-hour shift that had included 2 overdoses, a cardiac arrest, and a 3-car pileup on I-94. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. No, the first thing I noticed was how they both jumped apart when they saw me, like teenagers caught making out behind the gym. "Hey, Adam," Rachel said, her voice pitched just a little too high. "Evan brought me those prenatal vitamins I mentioned." I looked at the nightstand. No vitamins, just 2 empty coffee cups and what looked like the remnants of expensive pastries from that boutique bakery downtown, the kind of place where a single croissant costs more than my lunch. "That's thoughtful," I said, setting my equipment bag down with more force than necessary. The metal buckles clinked against the linoleum floor. Didn't realize prenatal care included hand-holding these days. Evan laughed, but it came out strangled. "Just being supportive, brother. Rachel was telling me how excited she is about little Adam Jr." "Funny thing about that," I said, pulling off my latex gloves with deliberate slowness. "We never actually decided on Adam Jr. In fact, last time we talked about names, Rachel said she wanted something more modern, more creative." I looked directly at my wife. "Didn't you say something about Evan being a nice name?" The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Rachel's face went through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly green that had nothing to do with morning sickness. "I should probably get going," Evan said, standing up so fast he knocked over his chair. "Band practice tonight." "On a Tuesday?" I asked. "That's new. We're trying to be more disciplined about our schedule." Right. Evan's band, Midnight Confession, had been trying to make it for the better part of a decade. They played dive bars and wedding receptions, and their biggest claim to fame was opening for a Nickelback tribute band at the county fair 3 years ago. But somehow, despite having no steady income, Evan always seemed to have money for expensive coffee and boutique pastries. After he left, Rachel and I sat in uncomfortable silence. She was due in 6 weeks, and her belly was round and prominent under the thin hospital gown. She'd been having some minor complications, nothing serious, just enough to warrant an overnight observation. I'd been looking forward to spending some quiet time with her, talking about the baby, about our future. Instead, I found myself wondering whose future we were really talking about. "Adam," she started, but I held up my hand. "I'm tired, Rach. Let's just get through tonight, okay?" But as I settled into the uncomfortable visitor's chair, pulling out my phone to check messages, I couldn't shake the image of how natural they'd looked together. How Evan's thumb had been stroking the back of Rachel's hand in small, intimate circles. How she'd been looking at him with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in months. My phone buzzed with a text from my partner, Jake. "Heard your wife's in the hospital. Everything okay with the baby?" I started to type back a standard response, but then I noticed something. Rachel's tablet was on the rolling table next to her bed, and the screen was still lit up. She must have been using it when Evan arrived and forgotten to close whatever she'd been looking at. From my angle, I could see it was her text messages, and the last conversation wasn't with me or her mother or any of her girlfriends from the advertising agency where she worked. It was with Evan. The preview showed just enough. "I can't keep doing this. Adam's getting suspicious and—" "Adam?" Rachel's voice cut through my thoughts. "You're staring." "Just thinking," I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. "About names." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We have time to figure that out." "Do we?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her hospital bed, pulling the blanket higher up her chest. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said, but I was already making plans. I'm going to grab some coffee from the vending machine. Want anything? I'm fine. I kissed her forehead. It felt like a performance, and headed for the door. But instead of going to the vending machine, I took the stairs to the parking garage. I needed air. I needed space to think. And I needed to figure out what the hell was going on with my wife and my brother. The December wind cut through my uniform shirt as I stood between the concrete pillars, looking out at the city lights. Minneapolis in winter was unforgiving, all gray skies and dirty snow, and the kind of cold that made your bones ache. It matched my mood perfectly. I'd been a paramedic for 12 years, ever since I got out of the Army. I'd seen every kind of human misery you could imagine: overdoses, accidents, domestic violence, suicides. I thought I'd developed a pretty good sense for when people were lying to me, but apparently I'd been blind to the lies happening in my own home. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my mother. "How's Rachel doing? Evan said she might need to stay another night," Evan said. Of course he did. When had my brother become the family spokesperson for my wife's medical condition? I was still staring at the text when another one came through, this one from an unknown number. "You should check your wife's browser history. A friend." My hands started shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. I didn't go back to Rachel's room that night. Instead, I called in sick for my next shift and drove home to our little colonial in Bloomington, the house we'd bought 3 years ago when we got married, back when I still believed in things like happily ever after and growing old together. The place felt different now, like I was seeing it through new eyes. The framed photos on the mantel that I'd always thought showed a happy couple now looked staged. Rachel's smile seemed forced. My own expression looked oblivious. I went straight to our home office and fired up the desktop computer. Rachel and I shared it, though she mostly used her tablet and laptop for work. But we'd set up the browser to sync across all devices, which meant that if she'd been careless, she had been. The browser history was a roadmap of deception. Searches for early paternity testing, signs your husband suspects cheating, and how to tell if a baby looks like the father. There were visits to pregnancy forums where she'd posted questions under an assumed name, asking for advice about complicated situations and family dynamics. But the worst part was the email account I found. A Gmail address I'd never seen before, registered under a fake name but clearly belonging to Rachel. The password was saved in the browser, our anniversary date, because apparently she wasn't just a cheater, she was also unoriginal. The emails went back months, long, detailed messages between Rachel and Evan that started as friendly check-ins and gradually became something else entirely. By July, they were talking about meeting up when I was working overnight shifts. By August, they were exchanging photos that made my stomach turn. By September, they were discussing the possibility that the baby might not be mine. I printed everything, every email, every browser search, every forum post. The printer ran for 20 minutes straight, churning out page after page of evidence that my marriage was a lie. The timeline was damning. Rachel and I had been trying to get pregnant for over a year, with no success. We'd even started talking about fertility testing. Then, suddenly, in late August, she announced she was pregnant. She'd been so happy, so excited. I'd been thrilled. Now I realized the timing coincided perfectly with when her relationship with Evan had turned physical. My phone rang. Rachel. "Adam, where are you? The nurse said you never came back last night." "I'm at home," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Needed to grab some things." "Are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine, just tired." "Well, the doctor says I can go home this afternoon if everything looks good. Can you pick me up around 3? I looked at the stack of printed emails on my desk. "Sure, I'll be there." "I love you," she said, and for a moment, she sounded like the woman I'd married. "Yeah," I said, "me too." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of our home office, surrounded by the evidence of my wife's betrayal. I should have been angry. I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt something else entirely. I felt calculating. See, 12 years as a paramedic teaches you a few things about human nature. It teaches you that people lie, especially when they're scared. It teaches you that the truth usually comes out eventually, often in the worst possible way. And it teaches you that sometimes the best response to a crisis isn't to react emotionally. Sometimes the best response is to make a plan. I spent the morning organizing everything I'd found into a comprehensive file. I made copies of the most damning emails and stored them in multiple locations. I took screenshots of the browser history and saved them to a flash drive. Then I did something that would have made my old army buddies proud. I conducted reconnaissance. I drove by Evan's apartment complex, a rundown place near the university where he'd been living since his last girlfriend kicked him out. His beat-up Honda was in the parking lot, which meant he was probably sleeping off whatever he'd done the night before. Evan had always been a night owl, especially when he was avoiding responsibility. Next, I went to Rachel's office. She worked for a mid-sized advertising agency downtown in one of those glass towers that made everyone inside feel important. I'd been there a few times for company parties, enough to know the layout and some of the key players. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in a coffee shop across the street and watched the building. I was looking for patterns, routines, anything that might be useful later. At noon, I saw Rachel's boss, a sharp-dressed woman named Linda Morrison, leave for lunch. 15 minutes later, I saw Rachel's best friend and coworker Lisa Chen do the same thing. Lisa had always been friendly to me at company events, but there was something about her that I'd never quite trusted. She was too smooth, too quick with the right answer. Now I wondered if she knew about Rachel and Evan. My phone buzzed with a text from Evan. "Hey bro, can you swing by my place before you pick up Rachel? Want to talk to you about something." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Sure, what's up?" "Just some family stuff. See you around 1? "Family stuff. Right." I drove to Evan's apartment complex with the printed emails in a folder on my passenger seat. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with them yet, but I wanted them close. Evan answered the door in yesterday's clothes, looking like he'd slept about as well as I had. His apartment was its usual disaster: empty beer bottles, pizza boxes, musical equipment scattered everywhere. The smell of stale cigarettes and unwashed laundry hung in the air. "Want a beer?" he asked, already heading to the refrigerator. "It's 1 in the afternoon." "So?" He cracked open a can and took a long pull. I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "So, what did you want to talk about?" I asked. Evan sat down heavily on his couch, which was really just a futon with delusions of grandeur. "It's about Rachel." "What about her?" "I think..." He paused, took another drink. "I think she might be having some doubts. About the baby, about everything." I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of doubts?" "She's been asking me a lot of questions. About responsibility, about what it means to be a father. Heavy stuff, you know." "And you're an expert on fatherhood?" Evan flinched. "I'm just saying, she seems worried. Like, maybe she's not ready for all this." "All what?" "Marriage, kids, the whole domestic thing." I leaned back in the folding chair that served as Evan's guest seating. "That's interesting. Because when I talk to her, she seems excited about the baby, about our future together." "Maybe she's just telling you what you want to hear." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I could see Evan watching my reaction, trying to gauge how much I knew, how much I suspected. "Why would she do that?" I asked. "Because she cares about you, because she doesn't want to hurt you. But she's willing to hurt me anyway." Evan's beer can stopped halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if Rachel is having doubts about our marriage, about the baby, maybe she should talk to me about it directly, instead of going through intermediaries." I'm not an intermediary. I'm family. Are you? The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He set down his beer and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Adam, what's this really about? I stood up. I think you know what this is about. No, I don't. Then let me spell it out for you. I pulled the folder from under my arm and dropped it on his coffee table. It's about the fact that you've been sleeping with my wife. The silence that followed was absolute. Evan stared at the folder like it was a bomb that might go off at any moment. I don't know what you think you... I know about the emails, Evan. I know about the meetings. I know about everything. His face went through several expressions: denial, fear, anger, and finally, something that might have been relief. How long have you known? Does it matter? He picked up the folder with trembling hands and opened it. As he read, his face grew paler and paler. Adam, I can explain... No, I said, standing up. You can't. There's no explanation for this. There's no excuse. It just happened. We didn't plan it. Bullshit. This didn't just happen. This was a choice. Every email, every meeting, every lie, those were all choices. Evan closed the folder and looked up at me with eyes that were suddenly wet with tears. I'm sorry. No, you're not. Not yet. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled, and I could tell from his expression that it wasn't a pleasant smile. It means we're just getting started. I picked up Rachel from the hospital at 3 o'clock, just like I'd promised. She was waiting in the discharge area with a wheelchair and a stack of paperwork, looking tired but relieved to be going home. How are you feeling? I asked as I helped her into the car. Better. The doctor said everything looks normal. Baby's heartbeat is strong. That's good news. We drove in comfortable silence for a while. Rachel dozed against the passenger window, one hand resting on her belly. She looked peaceful, innocent even. It was hard to reconcile this image with the woman who'd been carrying on an affair with my brother for months. Did you talk to Evan today? She asked suddenly, without opening her eyes. Yeah, he stopped by while you were getting discharged. What did he want? Just checking on you, making sure you were okay. She smiled. He's sweet. I'm glad you two have been getting along better lately. Getting along better. Right. Rachel, I said carefully, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? With us, I mean. With our marriage? She opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Why would you ask that? I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we're not as connected as we used to be. Like we're both just going through the motions. Adam, I'm 7 months pregnant. I'm tired all the time, my back hurts, and I can't see my own feet. If I seem disconnected, it's because I'm focused on growing a human being inside my body. I know. Are you having second thoughts? About the baby? The question caught me off guard. No, of course not. Because if you are, now would be the time to say something. Before he's born. She'd said he. We decided to wait and be surprised about the gender, but Rachel had just referred to the baby as he. I'm not having second thoughts, I said. I want this baby. I want our family. Good, she said, closing her eyes again. Because I need to know you're committed to this. To us. The irony was almost too much to bear. That evening, I made dinner while Rachel rested on the couch. Chicken parmesan, her favorite. I even opened a bottle of wine, though she couldn't drink it in her condition. This is nice, she said as we ate. It feels like old times. Yeah, it does. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about us being disconnected. I looked up from my plate. And? I think you're right. I think we both need to make more of an effort to communicate better. Communication is important, I agreed. So if there's anything you want to tell me, anything at all, I want you to know that you can talk to me. The offer hung in the air between us. For a moment I considered taking it. I imagined laying everything out on the table, the emails, the timeline, the paternity questions. I imagined asking her directly if the baby was mine. Instead, I smiled and reached across the table to take her hand. I love you, Rachel. I love you too. After dinner, Rachel went to bed early. I waited until I heard her breathing deepen into sleep. Then I went to the home office and started making phone calls. The first call was to my friend Mike Torres, who worked in IT for the city. Mike and I had served together in Afghanistan, and he owed me a few favors from our army days. Adam, hey man, how's Rachel doing? She's good. Listen, Mike, I need some help with something. Computer stuff. What kind of computer stuff? The kind where you don't ask too many questions. There was a pause. That's serious? That's serious. Okay. What do you need? I explained what I was looking for. Phone records, social media activity, anything that could help me build a more complete picture of Rachel and Evan's relationship. Mike listened without comment, then gave me the name of a private investigator who specialized in digital forensics. The second call was to my lawyer, a guy named Tom Bradley, who'd handled the paperwork when Rachel and I bought the house. Tom was expensive, but he was discreet, and he knew family law. Adam, good to hear from you. How's married life treating you? That's actually why I'm calling. I need some advice about divorce proceedings. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. It's complicated. There's a baby involved, and there are some questions about paternity. I see. Well, the first thing you need to know is that in Minnesota, if you're married when the child is born, you're presumed to be the legal father regardless of biology. What if I can prove the child isn't mine? That changes things, but you'd need genetic testing, and that can be tricky if your wife doesn't cooperate. What if she doesn't know that I know? Tom was quiet for a moment. Adam, what exactly are you planning? I'm planning to protect myself, and I'm planning to make sure that if this marriage ends, it ends on my terms. Be careful. Family court judges don't like games. This isn't a game. The third call was to my sister Jenny, who lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids. Jenny was 5 years older than me and had always been protective of her little brothers. She was also the only person in our family who'd never been impressed by Evan's charm. Adam, it's late. Is everything okay? I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. What do you think of Evan? Jenny was quiet for a long moment. That's a loaded question. I'm serious, Jen. What do you really think of him? I think he's irresponsible. I think he's selfish. And I think Mom and Dad have been enabling him his whole life. Do you think he's capable of betraying family? Adam, what's going on? I told her everything. The emails, the timeline, the paternity questions. Jenny listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of disgust or anger. That son of a jerk, she said when I finished. And Rachel, God, Adam, I'm so sorry. I need to know if anyone else in the family suspects anything. I don't think so. You know how Mom and Dad are. They see what they want to see. But Adam, what are you going to do? I'm going to handle it. What does that mean? It means I'm going to make sure that everyone knows exactly who Evan really is. And I'm going to make sure that Rachel understands there are consequences for her choices. Be careful. Don't do anything stupid. I'm not going to do anything illegal, but I'm not going to just roll over and pretend this didn't happen either. After I hung up with Jenny, I sat in the dark office for a long time, thinking about strategy. In the Army, we'd learned that the best way to defeat an enemy was to know them better than they knew themselves, to understand their weaknesses, their fears, their pressure points. Evan's weakness was his need to be liked, to be seen as the good guy. He'd built his whole identity around being the charming, artistic brother who everyone loved. If that image was destroyed, he'd have nothing left. Rachel's weakness was her career. She'd worked hard to build her reputation at the advertising agency. and she was proud of her professional success. She was also proud of her image as the perfect wife, the woman who had it all together. Both of them had something to lose, something they valued more than the truth. That gave me power. I spent the next hour researching Rachel's co-workers and clients, looking for connections and relationships that might be useful. I made note of upcoming campaigns she was working on, important meetings, performance reviews. Then I started planning. The next few weeks fell into a routine that felt almost normal. Rachel went back to work, I returned to my regular shifts at the ambulance service, and we settled into the kind of domestic rhythm that married couples develop over time. We talked about nursery colors and baby names. We attended a childbirth class at the hospital. We had dinner with my parents, who fussed over Rachel and made plans to be heavily involved grandparents. The only difference was that now I was watching everything with new eyes. I noticed how Rachel's phone was always face down when I was around. I noticed how she'd started taking calls in the other room, claiming they were work-related. I noticed how she'd suddenly developed an interest in going to the grocery store alone, and how those trips always seemed to take longer than they should. I also noticed that Evan had become scarce. He stopped dropping by unannounced, stopped calling just to chat. When he did show up for family gatherings, he was nervous and distracted, avoiding eye contact with both Rachel and me. But I wasn't just watching. I was also acting. The private investigator Mike had recommended was a woman named Sarah Kim, a former police detective who specialized in domestic cases. She was expensive, but she was thorough. Within a week, she'd confirmed everything I already suspected and provided additional details I hadn't known. Rachel and Evan had been meeting regularly at a motel near the airport. They'd been there as recently as 3 days ago, while I was working a double shift. The desk clerk remembered them because they always paid cash and because Rachel was obviously pregnant. Sarah also discovered that Rachel had opened a separate bank account, one that I didn't know about. She'd been transferring small amounts of money from our joint account over the past few months. Not enough to be immediately noticeable, but enough to build up a small nest egg. She's planning something, Sarah told me during our meeting at a diner in St. Paul. The separate account, the careful timing, this isn't just an affair, this is preparation for a major life change. Like leaving me, like leaving you, probably after the baby is born, and taking half of everything I own in the process, plus child support for a kid that might not even be yours. I stirred my coffee and thought about the implications. What would you do? If I were you, I'd get ahead of it. File first, control the narrative, but you'd need to be smart about it. What do you mean? I mean that if you're going to blow this up, you need to make sure you have all your ducks in a row. Evidence, witnesses, documentation, and you need to think about timing. The baby's due in 6 weeks. Exactly. Right now, you're the presumed father. Once that kid is born, everything gets more complicated. That night, I lay in bed next to Rachel, listening to her breathe and feeling the baby move under her skin when I put my hand on her belly. For a moment, I let myself imagine that this was real, that the child she was carrying was mine, that we were actually the happy family we pretended to be. Then I remembered the emails, and the feeling passed. The next morning, I put the next phase of my plan into action. I started with Rachel's boss, Linda Morrison. I'd met Linda several times at company events, and she'd always struck me as a no-nonsense professional who valued loyalty and discretion. She was also, according to my research, recently divorced after discovering her own husband's affair. I called her office and asked if I could meet with her privately. I told her it was a personal matter related to Rachel, and that it was urgent. "Is Rachel all right?" Linda asked when I arrived at her office that afternoon. "Is there a problem with the pregnancy?" "Rachel is fine, physically, but there's something you need to know about her personal situation." I laid out the evidence carefully, methodically, the emails, the motel receipts, the timeline of the affair. Linda's expression grew colder and colder as she absorbed the information. "This is very disturbing," she said finally. But I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it. I expect you to be aware that one of your employees has been lying to her husband for months, that she's been using company time and resources to conduct an extramarital affair, that she's been distracted and unreliable because of her personal drama. Linda was quiet for a long moment. Has Rachel's work performance suffered? I don't know. You'd have to ask her other colleagues. Like who? Like Lisa Chen. I'd been waiting for the right moment to bring up Lisa, and Linda's question gave me the opening I needed. Actually, I said, I think Lisa might already know about the affair. She and Rachel are close friends, and Lisa was at several of the same locations where Rachel met with my brother. This wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Sarah's investigation had shown that Lisa and Rachel frequently had lunch together, and that some of those lunches had taken place near the airport motel. I see, Linda said. Well, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. I'll handle it from here. What does that mean? It means that Rachel's personal life is her own business, but if it's affecting her work or creating liability issues for the company, I'll need to address it. I left Linda's office feeling satisfied. I'd planted the seeds of doubt, and I knew Linda well enough to know that she'd follow up. Rachel's perfect professional image was about to take its first hit. Next, I visited my parents. Mom and Dad lived in the same house where Evan and I had grown up, a modest rambler in Richfield, with a big backyard and a basement full of family memories. They were both retired, Dad from the post office, Mom from elementary school teaching, and they spent most of their time doting on their grandchildren and waiting for more. Adam, Mom said when she opened the door. What a nice surprise. Is Rachel with you? No, she's at work. I actually wanted to talk to you and Dad about something important. We sat in the living room, surrounded by family photos that suddenly felt like evidence of a life that was falling apart. There was my high school graduation picture, Evan's college diploma, our wedding photos, pictures of family vacations and holidays. What's on your mind, son? Dad asked. I'd rehearsed this conversation, but it was still difficult to begin. I need to tell you something about Evan and Rachel. Mom's face immediately creased with concern. Are they okay? They're fine physically, but they've been having an affair. The words landed like bombs in the quiet living room. Mom gasped and put her hand to her mouth. Dad's face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like anger. That's a very serious accusation, Dad said finally. I have proof. I showed them a carefully selected portion of the evidence, enough to make the case, but not so much that they'd be overwhelmed by the details. Mom cried. Dad got very quiet and very still. I can't believe this, Mom said. Evan would never, and Rachel, she's like a daughter to me. I'm sorry, Mom. I know this is hard to hear. What are you going to do? Dad asked. I don't know yet. I'm still figuring that out. The baby, Mom started, might not be mine. She cried harder. Dad stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Evan and I had played as kids. I failed somewhere, he said quietly. I failed as a father. This isn't your fault, Dad. Isn't it? Evan's 30 years old and he's never held a steady job, never taken responsibility for anything. We kept bailing him out, kept making excuses for him. And now this. What do you want us to do? Mom asked through her tears. Nothing for now. I just wanted you to know the truth before everything comes out. When will that be? Soon. I left my parents' house feeling both guilty and vindicated. They didn't deserve to be hurt by this, but they needed to know who their golden boy really was. The final stop of the day was Evan's apartment. I found him in his usual state, hungover, unshaven, surrounded by the detritus of a wasted life. But this time, he looked genuinely scared when he saw me at his door. We need to talk, I said. Adam, I don't think we need to talk now. He let me in reluctantly. The apartment smelled worse than usual, like he'd been stress-eating takeout and drinking heavily. "I know you've been avoiding me," I said, "and I know why. I told you I'm sorry. It just happened." "Stop saying that. Nothing just happens. You made a choice to pursue my wife. She made a choice to let you. You both made dozens of choices over and over again for months." Evan slumped onto his futon. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me about the baby." His face went white. "What about the baby? Is it mine?" "I don't know. But you think it might be yours?" He nodded miserably. "How long has this been going on?" "Since July." "And when did Rachel get pregnant?" "August." The timeline fit. Rachel had announced her pregnancy in late September, claiming she was about 6 weeks along. But if she'd gotten pregnant in August, she would have been further along than that. "She lied about the timing," I said. "She was scared. She didn't know what to do. So she decided to let me think I was going to be a father. We thought maybe it would work out, that you'd never have to know. And if the baby looked like you, we'd deal with that when it happened." I stared at my brother, this man I'd grown up with, played with, protected when we were kids. This man who was now sitting in his squalid apartment, admitting that he'd been planning to let me raise his child. "You're pathetic," I said. "Adam, no, I'm serious. You're 30 years old. You live in a shithole apartment. You have no job, no prospects, no future, and instead of fixing your life, you decided to steal mine." "It wasn't like that." "That's exactly what it was like. You saw that I had something good, a wife, a home, a baby on the way, and you decided you wanted it." Evan was crying now, which somehow made me angrier. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm going to destroy you," I said calmly. "I'm going to make sure that everyone knows exactly what you are. Mom and Dad, your friends, your bandmates, everyone. Please don't do this. You should have thought of that before you started sleeping with my wife." I left him there, sobbing on his futon, and drove home to wait for Rachel. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I was in the kitchen making dinner when Rachel walked through the front door, her face flushed with anger and her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We need to talk," she said, dropping her purse on the counter with enough force to rattle the contents. "Okay," I said, not looking up from the onions I was chopping. "What about?" "About the fact that you went to my office today. About the fact that you talked to Linda." I set down my knife and turned to face her. "How did that conversation go?" She asked me about my relationship with Evan. She asked me about my work performance. She asked me if I was having personal problems that were affecting my job. "And what did you tell her?" I told her I didn't know what she was talking about. "Did she believe you?" Rachel's composure cracked slightly. "She put me on administrative leave, pending a review of my recent work and my professional conduct." I nodded. "That seems reasonable." "Reasonable? Adam, I could lose my job over this. You could lose a lot more than that." She stared at me, and I could see the moment when she realized how much I knew. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture that might have been touching under different circumstances. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Long enough." "I can explain." "No, you can't. There's no explanation for this, Rachel. There's no excuse." She sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, looking suddenly exhausted. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me the truth. All of it. What's the point? You've obviously already made up your mind about everything. The point is that I'm giving you one chance to be honest with me. One chance to show me that you're capable of telling the truth." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It started as friendship. Evan was going through a rough patch with his music, and you were working so much, and I was lonely. We started talking, just as friends. Then it became something more." "When?" "July. The night of your birthday party, actually. I remembered that night. We'd had a barbecue in the backyard with both our families. I'd worked a double shift the day before and had fallen asleep on the couch while everyone else was still partying. You betrayed me with my brother while I was asleep in the next room. It wasn't like that. It was emotional. We both felt guilty afterward. But not guilty enough to stop. No. And the baby. Her hand moved to her belly again. I don't know. It could be yours. But it could be his. Yes. What were you planning to do? Just let me raise another man's child? I was hoping it wouldn't matter. I was hoping we could make it work. By lying to me for the rest of our lives. By protecting our family. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Our family. That's rich. Adam, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. Fix this? Rachel, you've been sleeping with my brother for 6 months. You're carrying a baby that might not be mine. You've lied to me, to our families, to everyone. What exactly do you think we can fix? We can fix us. We can fix our marriage. Our marriage is over. The words hung in the air between us. Rachel started crying in earnest now, big, gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Please, she said, please don't do this. Think about the baby. I am thinking about the baby. I'm thinking about the fact that he might grow up believing I'm his father when I'm actually his uncle. Does it matter? Biology doesn't make a family. Love makes a family. You're right. And you chose to destroy our family when you chose to betray me. I walked to the counter and picked up a manila folder I'd placed there earlier. These are divorce papers. I'm filing tomorrow. Adam, no. I'm also requesting a paternity test as soon as the baby is born. You can't do this. Actually, I can, and I am. She looked at the papers like they might burst into flames. What about Evan? What about him? Are you going to destroy him too? Evan destroyed himself. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it. He's your brother. He was my brother. Now he's just the man who betrayed me with my wife. Rachel stood up unsteadily, one hand on her back, the other still protecting her belly. I won't let you do this. I'll fight you. With what? You're unemployed, you're pregnant, and you have no money of your own. Well, except for that secret bank account you've been building. Her face went white. How did you... I know everything, Rachel. Every lie, every secret, every betrayal. I've been planning this for weeks. You're sick. No, I'm thorough. There's a difference. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'm going to stay with Lisa tonight. Good luck with that. She stopped with her hand on the doorknob. What's that supposed to mean? It means you might want to call first. I could see her processing this, trying to figure out what I'd done, what I might know about Lisa. The truth was, I didn't know anything specific about Lisa's involvement, but I'd planted enough seeds of doubt with Linda that I was confident Lisa was having her own difficult conversations right about now. You bastard, Rachel said. Maybe. But I'm not a cheater, and I'm not a liar. She slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of the dinner I'd been preparing, and felt something that might have been relief. The pretending was over. The careful planning and strategic maneuvering was done. Now came the end game. My phone rang. It was Evan. Adam, Rachel just called me. She's hysterical. What did you do? I told her the truth, that our marriage is over, and that I know about the baby. Jesus Christ, she's talking about leaving town. Where would she go? She doesn't have any money. She has some savings. Not anymore. I froze our joint accounts this afternoon. You can't do that. I already did it. My lawyer says it's perfectly legal as long as I'm not trying to hide assets. Adam, please. Think about what you're doing. I have been thinking about it for weeks. This is what I want. What about the baby? What about him? He's innocent in all this. You're right. He is. which is why I'm going to make sure he grows up knowing the truth about his parents. And if he's yours? Then he'll grow up knowing that his mother is a cheater and his uncle is a piece of shit. Evan was quiet for a moment. I never meant for this to happen. Yes, you did. Maybe not consciously, but you did. You've always been jealous of what I had, and you finally found a way to take it. That's not true, isn't it? Think about it, Evan. Really think about it. When did this start? Right after Rachel and I bought the house. Right after we started talking about having kids. Right when it looked like I was building the kind of stable adult life that you've never been able to manage. I loved her. You loved the idea of her. You loved the idea of taking something that belonged to me. She's not property, Adam. No, she's not. She's a person who made choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences. I hung up and turned off my phone. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my living room, looking at the family photos on the mantel and thinking about how different everything would look this time next week. The house felt different already. Emptier, but also cleaner somehow, like a weight had been lifted. Tomorrow, I would file the divorce papers. I would meet with Linda Morrison again and provide her with additional evidence of Rachel's unprofessional conduct. I would call my parents and give them an update on the situation. And I would start the process of building a new life, one based on truth instead of lies. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. I assumed it was from Rachel, probably using Lisa's phone. I deleted the message without responding. She was wrong. It was over. It had been over the moment I found those emails. Everything that happened now was just cleanup. The next morning, I woke up alone for the first time in 3 years. The bed felt enormous, and the house was quieter than I'd ever heard it. No sound of Rachel getting ready for work, no morning news playing in the kitchen, no discussion of the day's plans. It should have been depressing. Instead, it felt like freedom. I made coffee and checked my phone. 17 missed calls from Rachel, 12 from Evan, and 3 from my mother. There were also several text messages, ranging from pleading to angry to threatening. I deleted them all without reading them completely. At 9 a.m. sharp, I was sitting in Tom Bradley's office, signing divorce papers. "You're sure about this?" Tom asked. "Once we file, there's no going back quietly. This is going to get messy." "I'm sure." "And you understand that if the child is yours, you'll still have parental responsibilities?" "I understand. But I also want it on record that paternity is in question." "That's going to be hard on everyone involved, including the child." "The child deserves to know the truth. Everyone deserves to know the truth." Tom nodded and made notes on his legal pad. "What about property division?" "I want the house. She can have her car and her personal belongings, but I want the house." "She might fight you on that." "Let her try. I'm the one with the steady job and the clean credit history. She's unemployed and facing potential professional sanctions." "About that, are you sure it was wise to involve her employer?" "Her employer had a right to know that she was using company resources for personal business, and that she was distracted by personal drama that could affect her work. Just be careful. If it looks like you're trying to sabotage her career out of spite, it could backfire in family court." "I'm not trying to sabotage anything. I'm just making sure the truth comes out." After I left Tom's office, I drove to the hospital where I worked. I'd requested a meeting with my supervisor, a tough former Army medic named Janet Rodriguez, who'd been running the ambulance service for 15 years. "Heard you're going through a rough patch," Janet said when I sat down in her office. "Word travels fast. It's a small community. People talk." She leaned back in her chair and studied me. "You want to tell me what's going on?" I gave her the abbreviated version. The affair, the paternity questions, the divorce. Janet listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of disapproval. "That's a hell of a thing," she said when I finished. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing." "You need time off?" "No. Actually, I'd like to pick up some extra shifts, if possible. I'm going to need the money and I'd rather stay busy." "I can arrange that. But Adam, if this starts affecting your work, if you're distracted or emotional on calls, I'll have to pull you off the schedule." "Understood. And if there's any drama, ex-wife showing up here, family members causing problems, I need to know about it immediately." "There won't be any drama." Janet raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." But even as I said it, I knew I was probably lying. Rachel and Evan weren't going to go quietly, and things were about to get much worse before they got better. I was right. The first sign of escalation came that afternoon when I arrived home to find Rachel's car in my driveway and the front door standing open. I found her in the nursery we'd been preparing, sitting on the floor surrounded by baby clothes and furniture. She'd been crying, and her face was puffy and red. "The locks were changed," she said without looking up. Yes, they were. "I had to climb through the basement window. That's breaking and entering. It's my house, too." "Not anymore." She held up a tiny blue onesie with "Daddy's Little Guy" printed on the front. "We bought this together, remember? At that little shop in Stillwater." "I remember. You were so excited. You kept talking about teaching him to throw a baseball, taking him fishing." "That was before I knew he might not be mine. He could still be yours." "Could be isn't good enough anymore, Rachel." She struggled to her feet, one hand on her back. At 8 months pregnant, she was huge and obviously uncomfortable. Part of me felt sorry for her. The rest of me remembered the emails. "I talked to a lawyer," she said. "Good. You'll need one. He says I have rights, as your wife, as the mother of your child. Potentially my child. He says you can't just throw me out of my own home." "Actually, I can. This house is in my name only. We never got around to adding you to the deed." Her face went pale. "That's not possible. Check the paperwork. I bought this house 6 months before we got married, using my VA benefits and my savings. You never contributed to the down payment or the mortgage payments." "But we're married. That makes it community property." "Minnesota isn't a community property state, and even if it were, the timing matters." She sat down heavily in the rocking chair we'd bought for the nursery. "You planned this." "No, I just never got around to adding your name to the deed. Lucky me." "You bastard." "So you keep saying." She was quiet for a moment, looking around the nursery at all the preparations we'd made together. The crib we'd assembled, the mobile we'd hung, the changing table we'd stocked with diapers and supplies. "What about the baby's things?" "What about them?" "Can I take them?" "If the baby is yours and Evan's, then yes. Take whatever you want." "And if he's yours?" "Then we'll figure out custody arrangements through the lawyers." "I can't believe you're being so cold about this." "Cold?" "Rachel, you were with my brother for 6 months. You lied to me about the paternity of the child you're carrying. You opened secret bank accounts and made plans to leave me, and you think I'm being cold?" "I made mistakes." "You made choices. Every day for months, you chose to betray me." "I chose to follow my heart." "You chose to follow your cunt." The word hit her like a slap. She recoiled as if I'd struck her physically. "Don't talk to me like that." "I'll talk to you however I want. You lost the right to my respect when you decided to cheat on me." She stood up again, moving toward the door. "I'm taking some clothes, and some of the baby things. Take whatever you want. Just make sure you're gone before I get back from work tomorrow." "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem anymore." "Adam, please. I know you're angry, but we can work this out. People get past infidelity all the time." "Some people do. I'm not some people." "What if I cut off all contact with Evan? What if I promise never to see him again?" "It's too late for promises." "It's never too late. It is for us." She lingered in the doorway, looking back at the nursery one more time. I did love you, you know. I still do. No, you don't. You love the security I provided. You love the life we built together. But you don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have been able to do what you did. That's not true. If it's not true, then you're even more messed up than I thought. After she left, I sat in the nursery for a long time, looking at all the things we'd bought for a baby who might not even be mine. The room felt like a mausoleum, a monument to hopes and dreams that had died with my marriage. I started packing everything into boxes. If the baby was mine, I'd set the room up again. If he wasn't, I'd donate everything to charity. Either way, I was done pretending that my life was something it wasn't. My phone rang. It was my mother. Adam, honey, Rachel called me. She's very upset. I'm sure she is. She says you threw her out of the house. She's exaggerating. She's 8 months pregnant, Adam. She shouldn't be under this kind of stress. She should have thought about that before she started cheating on me. I know you're hurt, but... Mom, stop. Just stop. I know you like Rachel. I know you want to see the best in everyone, but she made her choice. Now she has to live with it. What about the baby? What about him? He's innocent in all this. You're right, he is. Which is why he deserves to grow up in a home where he's wanted and loved, not in a home built on lies. You don't mean that. I absolutely mean that. If that baby is mine, I'll love him and raise him and be the best father I can be. But I won't pretend that his mother is something she's not. And if he's not yours, then he's not my responsibility. My mother was quiet for a long moment. I raised you better than this. You raised me to value honesty and loyalty and commitment. That's exactly what I'm doing. You're being cruel. I'm being realistic. Where is she going to go? I don't know, and I don't care. Maybe she can stay with Evan. They seem to enjoy each other's company. Adam, I have to go, Mom. I'm working a double shift tonight. I hung up and turned off my phone again. I was getting tired of explaining myself to people who didn't understand the situation. The truth was simple. Rachel had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now she was facing the consequences. I wasn't being cruel, I was being just. And justice, I was learning, was a cold and lonely thing. But it was also satisfying in a way that forgiveness never could have been. 3 weeks later, Rachel went into labor. I was working a shift when I got the call from Evan, of all people. His voice was shaky and panicked. Adam, you need to get to the hospital. Rachel's having the baby. Why are you calling me? Shouldn't you be there holding her hand? I am here. But she's asking for you. Tell her I'm busy. Adam, please. Whatever's between us, this is about the baby. The baby who might not be mine. He's coming whether he's yours or not. And Rachel, she's scared. I looked at my partner, Jake, who'd been listening to my side of the conversation. He nodded toward the door. Go, he said. I'll cover for you. I don't owe her anything. Maybe not, but you owe yourself the chance to know for sure. 40 minutes later, I was standing outside the delivery room at Hennepin County Medical Center, still wearing my paramedic uniform and trying to decide if I wanted to go inside. Through the small window in the door, I could see Rachel on the bed, her face flushed and sweaty with exertion. Evan was beside her, holding her hand and whispering something in her ear. The scene looked intimate, domestic, like a real family. A nurse came out of the room and saw me standing there. Are you the father? She asked. That's the question of the day. She's been asking for you. She's having a difficult time. Difficult how? The baby's in distress. We might need to do a C-section. I felt something twist in my chest. Despite everything, despite all the anger and betrayal and hurt, the thought of Rachel or the baby being in danger affected me more than I'd expected. Can I see her? Of course. I pushed through the door into the controlled chaos of the delivery room. Rachel looked up when she saw me, and her face crumpled with relief. Adam, you came. I'm here. I was so scared you wouldn't come. Evan looked uncomfortable, like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I'll give you two some privacy, he said, starting to leave. Stay, I said. You're as much a part of this as I am. The next hour was surreal. I found myself coaching Rachel through contractions, holding her hand, telling her she was doing great. Evan hovered awkwardly in the corner, clearly wanting to help but not knowing how. It felt like we were all playing roles in a play that none of us had auditioned for. When the baby finally came, a healthy, screaming, red-faced boy, the first thing I looked for was resemblance. Did he look like me? Did he look like Evan? Did he look like Rachel? Honestly, he just looked like a baby. A tiny, wrinkled, angry baby who was pissed off about being evicted from his warm, comfortable home. He's beautiful, Rachel said, tears streaming down her face as the nurse placed him on her chest. He's perfect, Evan added, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't say anything. I just watched this little person, this potential son or nephew, and tried to figure out what I was feeling. Adam? Rachel looked up at me. Do you want to hold him? I hesitated. Holding him would make it real, would make it harder to maintain the emotional distance I'd worked so hard to build. But I also knew that this might be my only chance. In a few days, we'd have the paternity test results, and everything would change. I took the baby carefully, supporting his head the way I'd learned in the parenting classes we'd attended together. He was so small, so fragile. His tiny fingers wrapped around my thumb with surprising strength. Hello, little guy, I whispered. He opened his eyes, dark blue like all newborns, and seemed to look right at me. For a moment, the rest of the world fell away. The betrayal, the anger, the hurt, none of it mattered. There was just this perfect little person who needed love and protection. What are you going to name him? I asked. Rachel and Evan exchanged a look. We were thinking, Michael, after your grandfather. My grandfather had been a good man, a World War II veteran who'd worked his whole life to provide for his family. He died when I was 12, but I still remembered his stories, his laugh, his unwavering sense of right and wrong. He'd be honored, I said. I handed the baby back to Rachel and stepped away from the bed. The spell was broken, and reality came flooding back. I should go, I said. Adam, wait. Rachel's voice was weak but urgent. We need to talk about everything. We'll talk after we get the test results. What if he's not yours? Then you and Evan will figure out how to raise him. And if he is yours? Then we'll figure out custody arrangements. I don't want custody arrangements. I want our family back. I looked at her, lying there with the baby in her arms and Evan hovering protectively nearby, and I felt something that might have been pity. Our family never existed, Rachel. It was just a story we told ourselves. I left the hospital and drove home through the quiet streets of Minneapolis. It was late, past midnight, and the city felt empty and peaceful. At home, I sat in the nursery I'd been avoiding for weeks and tried to imagine what it would be like if Michael was my son. Would I be able to look at him without thinking about Rachel's betrayal? Would I be able to love him completely, knowing how he'd been conceived? I thought about my grandfather, the man this baby had been named after. Grandpa Mike had been a simple man with simple values. Work hard, tell the truth, take care of your family. He would have been devastated by this situation, but he also would have done the right thing. The question was, what was the right thing? 3 days later, I got the call from Tom Bradley. The results are in, he said. Do you want me to read them to you, or do you want to come in? Just tell me. The child is yours, Adam. 99.7% certainty. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. You're sure? The lab is sure. Michael is your biological son. My son. The words felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. What happens now? I asked. Now we negotiate custody and support arrangements. Rachel's lawyer has already reached out about reconciliation. That's not happening. Are you sure? A lot of couples work through infidelity, especially when there's a child involved. I'm sure. But even as I said it, I wondered if I was making the right choice. Michael was my son, which meant he deserved to grow up in a stable, loving home. Could I provide that as a single father? Could I give him what he needed? That afternoon, I went back to the hospital. Rachel was being discharged, and I wanted to see Michael one more time before she took him. Where? She still didn't have a permanent place to live. I found them in the maternity ward, Rachel dressed and ready to leave, Michael sleeping in a carrier beside her bed. Evan was there too, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Adam," Rachel said when she saw me. "Tom called. He told me about the test results." "Yeah. I'm glad. I'm glad he's yours." "Are you?" "Of course I am. He deserves to have you as his father." "Where are you going to take him?" "I found an apartment. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe." "Where?" "Near my sister's place in Bloomington." I nodded. At least she'd have some family support. "I want to see him," I said. "Regularly." "Of course. We can work out a schedule." "And I want to be involved in decisions about his care. Doctor visits, daycare, all of it." "Absolutely." Evan cleared his throat. What about me?" I looked at him, this man who'd been my brother and was now just the person who'd destroyed my marriage. "What about you?" "I mean, I know I'm not his father, but I care about him, and about Rachel." "That's between you and Rachel, but if you want to be part of his life, you'll need to earn that right." "How?" "By proving that you're capable of being a responsible adult. Get a job, get your life together. Show me that you're someone I'd want around my son." Evan nodded, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. "I can do that." "We'll see." I picked up Michael, who was awake now and looking around with curious eyes. He was so small, so dependent. In a few years, he'd be walking and talking and asking questions about why Mommy and Daddy didn't live together anymore. What would I tell him? That his mother had made a mistake? That sometimes people hurt the ones they love? That life was complicated and messy and unfair? Or would I tell him the truth? That his mother had chosen to betray our family and that actions have consequences? "I love you, little guy," I whispered to him, "and I'm going to make sure you grow up knowing right from wrong." Rachel was watching me with tears in her eyes. "Adam, I know you hate me right now, but—" "I don't hate you," I said, and I realized it was true. "I don't feel anything for you anymore. The woman I married, the woman I loved, she doesn't exist. Maybe she never did. She did exist. She still does. No, she doesn't. That woman wouldn't have been capable of what you did." I handed Michael back to her. "I'll call you tomorrow about setting up a visitation schedule." "Adam, wait. Please. Can't we at least try, for Michael's sake?" I looked at her, holding our son, pleading with me to forgive her, to take her back, to pretend that the last 6 months hadn't happened. "No," I said. "We can't." And I walked away, leaving behind the woman who'd broken my heart and the brother who'd helped her do it. But I wasn't walking away from Michael. He was mine, and I would love him and protect him and teach him to be better than the people who'd brought him into this world. That would have to be enough. 6 months later, I was living in my house alone, working extra shifts to pay for child support and lawyer fees, and seeing my son every other weekend and one evening a week. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was honest, and it was mine. Rachel and Evan were still together, playing house in her small apartment. She'd found a new job at a smaller agency, making less money, but apparently happier. Evan had actually gotten a job too. Nothing glamorous, just retail work at a music store, but it was steady income. Maybe they'd make it work. Maybe they'd give Michael the stable home he deserved. Maybe their love story would have a happy ending. But it wouldn't be my happy ending. I'd chosen truth over reconciliation, justice over forgiveness. I'd burned everything down rather than live a lie. Some people would say I was wrong. Some people would say I was cruel, that I'd let my pride destroy my family. But when I looked at myself in the mirror each morning, I saw a man who'd stood up for himself, who'd refused to be a victim, who'd chosen his own dignity over everyone else's comfort. And when Michael was old enough to understand, I'd tell him the whole story. I'd let him decide for himself what kind of man he wanted to be. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do. Choose who we want to be and live with the consequences. I chose to be the kind of man who doesn't accept betrayal, who doesn't compromise his values for the sake of peace, who doesn't pretend that love is enough when respect is gone. It was a lonely choice, but it was mine, and I'd make it again.